Flipping hell. It did kick in. It has kicked in. We are live. That took a little while. God, that took ages. That took absolutely ages to go live. But here we are. And it's working. So let's just dig into what I wanted to talk about today. If you've not joined me before, I'm doing these lives primarily because I'm a person who hates recording videos, absolutely despises recording videos. And I thought, well, sod it. Who says you have to record them? Who says you can't just go live and talk about it and then edit the things afterwards? So I wanted to talk today about something that I think is really, really important. Playing it safe in business isn't free. It's actually a silent tax. And I'm going to talk about this silent tax that we put on ourselves that costs us lots of our future that for sometimes we never even see. And we're going to break down what this hidden tax is. We're going to break down how it affects us, how it impacts us, and how it stops us from achieving the majority of our goals. And this tax you pay every time you decide to put something off, every time you hesitate or choose comfort or safety over taking action, you're paying tax. And this is really one for you. So have you ever, honestly, honest question, have you ever looked back and thought, I wish I'd have done this sooner? I have. And there's a load of people online who will talk absolute bollocks about this and say, oh, I have no regrets. I have a ton of regrets, a ton of things, decisions, ideas I wish I'd not made or had made. And that's just life. I know I can't go back in a time machine, and you can't go back in a time machine. But there are things that you look up back on and go, God, I wish I'd have made that decision sooner. And I want to share one example of this. And this was foolishly probably one of my biggest regrets. In 2000, the early teens of 2010, 2012, that quite way on, social media was kind of taking off. And I made some very, very foolish decisions with the benefit of hindsight. The benefit of hindsight being I didn't do what I did now on social media back then. So I wasn't going all out on this. I was just using it in a very mediocre way. And part of my reason that I did that, I'd use Facebook, but I wasn't consistent. I'd use YouTube, but I wasn't consistent. I'd use Instagram and all of that stuff. Twitter, wasn't consistent. And I did all of this stuff like, nearly 15 years ago or more, that I regret, because back then I could have built a massive social media empire when I was 15 years younger, in my 20s, and absolutely nailed it. But I made a fatal error. I was so focused on what was immediately in front of me, my short-term needs, that I didn't think big enough picture. And so I was scrambling around trying to get business and, squandering the money I had by not making the right decisions rather than building out my socials as I should have back then. And, I teach people to not make that mistake now, but I made it massively myself. And I remember one particular event, when you have these memories of things that they never leave you. I can remember, and this is a number of years ago, and I used to have to get the megabus when I wanted to go to London. I didn't have a lot of money. I would get the National Express, Greyhound in the US, but cheap coaches that basically the toilets stank. You'd sit next to somebody for 5 hours and you'd feel horrible after getting off it, but I didn't have any money. And I was on this National Express train, coach, to London. I must have left at 3 a.m. to do a day in London. And I saw this guy advertising about how online courses at the time were massive and were going to be a huge thing. And I had, for a few moments, maybe an hour or so, toyed with this idea of I could launch an online course about marketing online. And this is way back, way back, before the internet is as it is now. And I thought about it, toyed with it, started writing plans down for it, and thinking about what I could put into that could really help people. And I got really excited about this. Did my day in London, back on the megabus, and I'm writing in my notepad about stuff. And then on that journey back up north, I started to go, yeah, but it won't work. It'll take ages to do, and I'll create this thing and it won't sell. And I did this whole speak to myself, talk to myself, talking myself out of it because of all the things that might not work and all of these pressing issues that I needed to deal with. I wasn't making mega bucks, so I was a bit hand to mouth. And if I did that, like, what happens over here? What happens with all this short-term hand-to-mouth stuff? And for very, very practical reasons, I decided not to do it. And I remember getting off that bus, and I remember consciously making the decision to not pursue anything like digital training. And I gave myself loads of great reasons: the risk, the potential of it not working, the time investment and no guarantee of success. I did all of that and focused on all the short-term stuff. And even now, 15 odd years later, I hugely regret that, because if I'd have even to 2% pursued that, I could have basically shortcut the 15 or 20-year journey I've been on. I could have got to a place where I was in 2018, 10 years earlier. And I didn't do it because I hesitated. I played up fictional scenarios in my head. And so I had to go round the block another 8 times until I realized where I was. And so I'm sure you've done this too. You've kind of put stuff off, kicked stuff down the road, whether it's been fear related, whether it's been practicalities of time, whatever the reason is, we do it. And it's this illusion. Sometimes it's just an illusion of safety that I don't need to do something. Maybe you're in that position where, you've got loads of great ideas, but because you're in a great position, because you're feeling comfortable, you're going, I'm going to put them off. In my scenario, it wasn't that. In my scenario, I was stressed out hand to mouth a little bit and didn't want to risk throwing my money or energy into something that wouldn't pay off. Huge mistake looking back. Massive mistake. I could have been 10 years ahead of myself where I am today. But this comes to the right time for me to do that was back then. If I look in the fullness of my 43 years on planet Earth, the best time would have been back then. But at that time, it was not the right time for me. And you might be in that same boat right now going, there's another time in the future that might seem better. When this other issue that I'm dealing with, when this pressure's gone away, maybe then is the better time. And it isn't. It really isn't. And, something that's really difficult for me, and it really illustrates it in my story on the coach and binning it off because of my short-term worry. I was so afraid, so fearful of losing what I had, which wasn't very much, that I binned the opportunity to gain something far bigger, far more valuable to me for protecting where I was. And human beings are horrendously bad with loss aversion. We actually value not losing more than winning. Yeah, just wrestle with that for a minute. We value not losing more than winning. And the reality is, right, if I look at my story and my situation of what happened with me, I let, you know, I had this idea in maybe 2010, so 15 years ago. And in the space of a day, I parked that idea. If I'd have run with that idea in 2010, I would have been doing something 8 years ahead of when I actually started doing that kind of online training stuff. 8 years ahead of myself. I could have had a learning curve 8 years earlier than I did. I could have mastered something when social media wasn't as competitive as it is. And sometimes I'll just be honest for a minute. The internet is full of bullshit. There's a lot of people coming on the internet saying they've built businesses they've not built, or people creating content giving advice that they've never followed. There's a lot of bullshit. But one of the things I think, and this is just a personal reflection, one of the things I think that is the biggest annoyance to me is influencers. And I get really annoyed by them because a lot of them are just bullshit. But I think if I look deeply, one of the biggest annoyances I find of influencers, yes, the legitimate, the faking, the false lifestyle, the selling a course is their only income. They've never done anything else. There's all of that fakery stuff. But I also have to admit to myself, one of the reasons I don't like influencers is because I see that kind of little mirror back to that window when I decided not to do something. I decided to not pursue a path that may have made me a bigger presence, bigger platform. I could have been way ahead of where I am today. And part of that, I look and those influencers kind of mirror back to me and almost like bitch slap me into thinking, Dean, what did you do? You could have been way ahead of where you are. And I don't think people would be ready to admit that, but sometimes that's what happens. We look at people who are a bit further on than us. We look at people further down the road and we kick ourselves. But for me, a whole different future in my world could have happened. But I was so afraid of losing what I've got, loss aversion, that I didn't move forward. And I bet you there's people watching me now who are also having that same thing. They're so afraid of losing, it keeps them standing still. And I've got something to say, by the way, about standing still, because there is no such thing as standing still. The world is moving on. The world is adapting. The world has adapted. And inaction piles up. Yeah, for me, inaction piles up. If I look and go, could I have built an online platform and done digital training in 2010? Yes. Was the internet ready for it then? Yes. Why did I take 8 years to put it off? Because I prioritized other things foolishly. But the world didn't stand still. Other people took that opportunity. Other people did that. Other people are doing things in your industry and they're taking off. So you waiting, me waiting is not waiting, it's falling behind. And if we don't keep moving forward, if we don't keep adapting and iterating what we're doing, basically we're going to get lapped. That's the reality of it. We get lapped. There's never a good time, but the cost of that inaction, the cost of doing nothing, exponentially kind of it piles up, it stacks up. And it's not just like it's not just about wasted time, is it? It's about the competition. When you do start, when you do realize and, slap yourself and realize I should have done this ages ago, and you start, it's harder. It's harder. It's more difficult. You feel less confident. I know if I'd have done what I did 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if I'd have done it, where would I be today? That's one thing. But who would I be today? And instead, I had to go on a journey and start this, late. I wasn't as confident later because I'd put things off and the market was more mature. How many opportunities did I lose? And all that was playing on my mind as I went, why did I not do this before? So this whole nonsense about not having regrets, it's absolutely nonsense. So why do we do this? Why do we not take action? Why do we not push forward with those ideas? Why do we stand still? Why do we say maybe another day? Why do we say now it's not the right time? How did I make that decision? It wasn't the right time. Well, it comes down to, bluntly, fear. We're afraid. I'm afraid. I was afraid that if I dived in, did all that stuff that I wanted to do 15 years ago, that, well, first off, what was the biggest fear? The biggest fear was that the modest revenue and income in my business that I had, I could put that at risk. That was the biggest fear. I was so looking down short term about, getting money now, that I was afraid to invest in something that would pay off in the long term. So I had short term challenges basically influencing my long term decisions. So something that could have helped me long term, and I knew it would have helped me long term there, but I deliberately made a choice because of the fear of, I need to deal with stuff now, that this would split my energy, and I binned it. So there's that short-term fear of prioritizing short-term. But I guess one of the biggest things that holds us back in this area is that fear of failure. The fear that we, if we invest in something, if we put our money into something, guess what? It could be for nothing. And, in the years I've invested in stuff, I've always had that thought of, what if this doesn't work? What if this doesn't work? And it's only as I've got older, I've started to kind of grow up and understand a bit more maturity, that everything does work. I've just got to extract the value from it. And, I've spent £3,000 buying something to learn something. I've done that stuff. And I've never regretted it, because, how do I put this? Often when I've bought stuff to help improve me, it's not been a big thing or lots of things that's made a difference. It's one idea and it opens my mind and I go ping. And for me, the fear of something not working is, it's basically saying, I've got this pot of money here and I'm going to put it into that. What if that doesn't work and I lose that money? And it's a one-sided argument, because what if I keep that money and I never learn that thing? And we can never be certain of what we're going to gain. But I have found, even in the things that didn't necessarily perform the way I hoped or expected, I've gained from it. And I think the big thing for me about this is, yes, I'm afraid of failing and I don't want to make a mistake. We all have that to some degree. But if you're so afraid to fail that you won't step forward, you're basically saying that you can't tolerate any risk whatsoever. Fear of failure. What if you make a mistake? What if you mess up? We cannot live and exist by that one-sided argument. And it is a one-sided argument. What if I win? You'll notice that when you go through a period where you're afraid to fail, it's a totally one-sided argument with yourself. What if, back on that coach, I put, what about this? What about this? What about this? And I stacked up all of the fears, and I didn't devote as much time to these things. And it's like, we do this all the time. we stack up the fears of failure, but then we don't stack up the, what if I don't do this? What if I don't do this? And then the other thing, you know, I used to run through my head, and maybe you did this. And, you know, as you get older, I think you'd stop caring. But I've gone through scenarios of like, what if somebody calls me out? What if somebody disagrees with me? What if somebody thinks I'm not good enough to do this? What if I give people advice and somebody disagrees with me? What will my friends think? What will my family think? What will my colleagues think? What will other people in the industry think? What about people who are more experienced than me? What about those people? What if they say something? And I would create this kind of imaginary judge and jury of me. And I'm like, as you get older, you know, when I was in my 20s, you know, we'll have another conversation about the difference in the 20s 20 years ago and the 20s now. But I was so afraid of what other people might say, what other people might think, that I literally created myself a prison. I put off opportunities because what if some random person? What if, you know, we all do it? I've seen people do this about posting content, and they say, I don't want to post too much because I might annoy people. Who? And they're talking about posting once a week, and they go, I've had this. Somebody literally say, what if I post once a week and I annoy somebody? Stay in your house. Stay in your house. Don't do anything, because what if you walk down the street and annoy somebody? What if you go to the cinema and annoy somebody? What if you go to a restaurant and annoy somebody? What if you buy a car and they don't like your car? You see how ridiculous it sounds as I roll this out, but we do this. We create these judge and jury of us. We ascribe opinions to them because we're so afraid of other people. And then as you get a bit older, as you realize, and I've done this, I've missed out on so many opportunities that I should have taken. You start to go, I don't give a flying fuck anymore. when you've passed up on so many things because you were worried about what other people might think, or you're worried about failure, you reach a point where you go, sod it. Because you look at them and go, what the fuck? Why did I miss all those things? Why did I not take those actions? Why did I not do all of that stuff? You start to go, I'm not doing that anymore. And I guess one of the reasons I'm doing this video, and you might think, what the hell is he doing on this video, is I've seen so many other people do it. I've seen so many other people do this where they like literally create a prison for themselves because they're afraid of stuff going wrong. They're afraid of people judging them or critiquing them. And then basically all of that compounds so they do nothing and then hate it. And that's the worst bit. You hate not doing it, but you've created a prison for you to live in. Now this next thought I have, I can't get my head around this thought. And it's the fear of success, being afraid to succeed. And in my head, I'm like, who the hell would be afraid to succeed? Who the hell would be terrified of what if this works and I can't handle it? I can't understand that one. And maybe there's some people who lean heavily on the fear of failure, fear of, you know, being judged. And then there's other people who, you know, lean on this one. But this one for me has never been like something I've worried about. What if it works too well? I've been I'm the person whose brain's wired of what if it doesn't work? What if it fails and I've invested all this time in it? What if I put all my energy in it and it flops? And I can't understand people who get into that place of, what if this succeeds, and be afraid? Because that for me sounds fantastic. But for me, what my biggest mistakes have been not doing something because I think, what if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't? And in all of these things, as you know, I keep saying as I've got older, I'm only 43. But as I've got older, I've kind of realized, like, I'm afraid of something failing. Okay, that's not a reason to not do something. First off, being afraid is not a reason to not take action. What it means is you've got a warning system. And that warning system is saying, take some extra caution. How do I do that? What can I do to prevent failure? So, I'm going to be doing more content about the coffee shop. So for those of you who don't know, I've just bought a coffee shop. My wife is predominantly running it. But everybody says the coffee shops, restaurants, they are the worst businesses to start because they're high cost and very difficult to make profitable. So I'm doing something that, in essence, is not the easiest or best business to start or take on. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, I might be coming to you and doing a YouTube video about 5 lessons I learned from failing at running a coffee shop. But I know it's difficult, so I know we need plenty of footfall. We need to keep our costs under control. I've written down all of the places where potentially it could fail. And I'm with my wife, we're working through what are the things that we need to do to prevent those things. But I'm still doing it. Yeah, and 15 years ago, I wouldn't have done that. It would have been a nice idea. I would have played with the idea, but when it came to the crunch, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So it's not about eliminating the fear. And I think this is something we get stuck on. It's not about eliminating fear. It's about moving forward and mitigating whatever that fear is throwing up. How do I manage that and move forward? And I wish I'd have known this 15 years ago as well. But maybe there's some things that become valuable lessons. And maybe somebody else is getting some value out of hearing me saying, God knows there's somebody on the internet somewhere might be listening to this and saying, Dean's has regrets. Everybody says don't have regrets. Everybody has regrets. They're fucking lying. Maybe somebody will make that decision to avoid them on that 15 years of wait or the 8 years of delay. So I love the phrase, you have to take massive action. I love when Tony Robbins says it. But I think the first thing has to be making one decision to step forward. If there's something that fear, for whatever reason, fear is holding you back, doesn't matter what it is. If fear is preventing you from taking action, what that basically means is you are allowing fear to be in control of your life. So if fear is in control of your life, you are not in control. If fear makes a decision, you're not in control. And fear usually plays out by overwhelming you with negative stuff, and you passively make the decision. In other words, the decision's made, you just never deliberately choose it. You don't sit down and go, I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of this. So I'm not going to do it. The fears just erode your moving towards it, and they just eat away at the decision until eventually it just fizzles away. That's how fear works. So if fear gets in control, it will basically eat away at the decision. So you don't make it, you just don't do it. In other words, fear doesn't want you to move forward, so it will happily let you keep yourself where you are. But that means when you let fear do that, you are choosing to let fear control you. So the one thing you should do is, if you feel like fear is controlling you, the more you let fear do that, the worse your life gets. Because once you allow fear to take control, it becomes more powerful. You embolden it, you empower it, and it starts to take more severe control of your decisions, and will grip you more deeply. So the only way to break it is to do something. So I'll give you another story from my journey. About 8 years ago, weirdly, not connected, but about 8 years ago, I had a massive fork in the road. Yeah, 8 years ago, massive fork in the road in my business journey. Um, I was, we were at that time. I had a business partner, and at that time, I had a business partner. He was my best friend, and the business. It was a rough business. We, it wasn't perfect. It was, but we'd grown a business, and it needed a bit of cleaning up and tidying up and all that kind of stuff. But it was doing okay. Um, Things we needed to work on and fix naturally, and we ended up in a position whereby myself and my business partner, we didn't see eye to eye, and it became quite a difficult business breakup. Let's say that. If you've watched other videos, you'll hear more about it. Very difficult business breakup. And my confidence at that point was a bit battered. I'd lost my mojo quite a lot. And I was just sat behind a computer comparing spreadsheets and, all that stuff. So I wasn't in the best place. And my business partner, best man, best friend, decided he was going to go and do his own business without me. It was a very bitter breakup, very difficult breakup. And so when it happened, I was faced with a major decision of how do I move forward, because my confidence was pretty low. I'd done a lot of great things in the past, a lot of amazing things that I boast about today still. But I'd gone through a couple of years of just sat behind a desk. And so my confidence had gone. I was knocked quite a bit. And with my business partner leaving, he was the salesman of the business, and I was the spreadsheet finance person, ops person. I was like, I'm going to have to get out there and do all of this stuff and basically rebuild a business on my own. And I was terrified, absolutely terrified. And I'd got responsibilities. A house had been sold to invest in this business that now was a very, very, questionable about whether it could actually even go forward. And I decided I had a decision to make. And this maybe is a bit derogatory. With hindsight, you say things to yourself at the time. And I had to make a decision. If this went wrong and I pushed forward with this new business, I was going bankrupt. It was, cataclysm. If it went wrong, oblivion, lose homes, everything, start over, the works. So that was if it went wrong. And that was preoccupying me quite a bit, obviously. And then the other scenario was I get a job. I hated the thought of getting a job because I'd been, a business owner for so long. I was probably unemployable. My ability to follow instructions were probably zero. But I was in this place where I was torn between this. And I said, if I don't make this work, I'm going to have to get a job stacking shelves at Tesco. And I put my worst case outcome. I didn't realize I'd done this. I either make this work or I stack shelves at Tesco. And that's what I did. I forced the two things together, and I flogged myself to basically reinvent this business, overhaul it, reformat it, refocus it, the works, whilst having to make it work on the go. And this was about 8 years ago, something like that. Rebranded it, all that kind of stuff, and had to do it like lightning speed. And held myself to, if I don't do this, I'm going to have to do that. And I put the worst case scenarios. Of course, it could have been, I could have said, well, it could all go wrong. Business fails, I go bankrupt, lose my house, lose everything, and, end up on benefits or whatever, worst case scenario. Mid case scenario, it works okay and I'm okay. I didn't do that. I just looked at the absolute worst case scenario. Terrible scenario. But what I did do, which helped me take action, was I actually pitched the worst case employment scenario on the back of it. And, all my ideas, my independence, all of that disappearing to just follow instructions and stack shelves. And what am I saying? I had to make a decision that I was going ahead with building what is today Maverick. I had to make that decision, that conscious choice. And I took one step and then another step and another step. I love the idea of what Tony Robbins says about taking massive action. But in reality, the biggest action you have to take is to say, I'm going forward without the fear. And fear is a tax on your future. And that tax will cost you lots of stuff if you continually allow it to dominate and take control of what you're doing. And for me, that tax turned into taking 10 years longer to achieve something because I was afraid and thinking so short term. So there is a hidden cost of doing nothing, and it is losing ground. But it's not just losing ground, it's ceding ground to other people. Your ideas not implemented, somebody else could come along and do it. And that's going to create some kick in the teeth for you. But also the market's moving on and it gets more and more competitive the longer you wait. So there is a tax. There's a tax of doing nothing.